You're listening to the Savoir Faire Audio Experience.
Are you ready?
The Savoir Faire Experience is your guide to everything that has to do with lifestyle. From dating, rides, style, and entertainment. All brought to you by the editor of Savoir Faire magazine, Robert White. Anything goes on this audio experience. So, let's go.
It's still the best.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Savoir Faire Audio Experience. Thank you guys for listening, sharing, and following. We see you and we appreciate you as usual. We want to bring you really great interviews with really great people. And as you know, music is a real close place for me when we talk with musical artists, and we always kind of like dive into the creatives. And today's one of those days. We're talking to an artist today again, which I love. So Kristopher Roe from the Ataris is here. What's up, Chris?
The Ataris, but that's totally fine.
I'm so sorry,
it's
buddy.
Funny. It's like the old game from the 70s and 80s, like Atari game cards.
Man,
that's all right.
I'm an amateur. It's my first day.
No. I always make this joke, and I love it. That like still to this day, sometimes that like people will mess up our goofy name. Like it's like one of those names where I'm like, when you read it, it's like Ramones. I saw the Ramones in like the early 80s. And I love seeing that old footage of them in like South America where the people would be running alongside Ramones, and I think it's the greatest thing ever. So don't worry about it.
So what you need to do is you need to put a comma in between the I and the S.
Yeah, but that's not rock and roll. Ramones didn't do it. All the Strokes, they got, and it's a goofy name. Like the Descendants, they spell it wrong on purpose. It's like, and I always ask Bill, I was like, what was with that? And he's like, it's an A. And he's like, yeah, it's a stupid name. Frank came up with it. And, yeah, but anyway, no, that's cool. Thank you for having us on.
I definitely appreciate.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys spending time, obviously, and being able to connect, talk a little bit about music. And I want to dive into a lot of things that you've been on your personal journey, but also with the band too. So the way we like to start these things off is just kind of build a little bit of history and kind of let people know where you kind of came from. So Kristopher, my first question is basically like, talk to me about your journey, personal journey through music. When did music first become part of your life? How did you get influenced? All that good stuff.
Well, that's a really great question. I appreciate that. And Alex, I was telling you off the camera earlier, my whole life, I was really grateful growing up in a musical household. My mom loved the Beatles, Motown, all of those, great records of the 50s and 60s and early 70s. We'd always have the radio on. My dad loved Sabbath, The Who, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. So I had that coming from both sides. But as a kid, you kind of discover your own thing. I always had, when in my baby book my parents had, it said like 1979, I got a Kiss record. So Kiss was like my gateway into music. They were everywhere on TV and not so much the radio, but there were these larger than life characters. So that was my gateway. And then I'd say, that was kind of my world until the 80s. And then I just remember early 80s kind of discovering punk rock. I think the Ramones being the first one. I don't remember exactly how. I think maybe on Night Flight or like one of those programs that was like really late night. And I remember seeing like some bits of Decline of the Western Civilization. There was like a clip of like the first early Black Flag, like Free Rollins with Ron Reyes singing first 4 years era. And I just thought this is amazing. What is this? And as a young kid, and then I went and saw I think my first shows was my dad. He took me to see Metallica on the Injustice for All album, and then I kind of get into thrash metal, like the DRI and like the skate punk scene. Never could skate, but that was like my gateway. And then from there, then it was like indie stuff like My Bloody Valentine, The Cure, The Smiths. I loved a lot of like the dreamy shoegaze stuff from coming out of the UK, Swerve Driver, all that stuff. And then it was kind of like, okay, I started writing my own songs in my bedroom, but I wasn't good enough to play like Sonic Youth, Dinosaur Jr., that world that I loved so much. And then I discovered like Jawbreaker, the first two Green Day, like Lookout Records albums, and some of the like melodic power pop stuff, The Descendants, and then back to the Ramones. And that was like, okay, I can write this. They sing songs about things I can relate to, about relationships, and the kid at school beating me up because I'm an art kid and like I listen to music, this kind of counterculture. And so that was when I started actually realizing like I can do this. This is something that speaks to me. And then as I got older again, then I went back and started becoming even having even more broad palette. Like I said, going into listening to old jazz and listening back to those albums that I may have skipped. And it's just always been such a huge part of my life. And I always strive to like feed more, books and music and poetry or art or whatever into my brain, because I always feel that makes for better songwriting. If you keep a closed mind or only listen to your contemporaries, your songs are only going to sound as good as that. So yeah, it was just always a wanderlust to like, search for these things. And still to this day at 48, that's my whole life has been consumed by music. I am that guy in that Nick Hornby book of like High Fidelity. That is me.
No, I love that. I love the idea that you had so many different musical influences, but that you also brought in your own horizons and to just stick with a genre that you really kind of fell in love with, even at a young age, kind of like being in the punk scene and all that stuff. So was there an instrument attached to your writing? Like, are you a guitar player at heart, or are you multiple instruments, Daryl?
Multiple instrument, but when I started, it was mostly guitar and a little bit of piano. I wasn't ever taught. And a weird way I play guitar is I'm right-handed, but I flip a right-handed guitar over and play it backwards like Albert King or Dick Dale.
Yeah.
So my big E string is on the bottom. I do my chords completely backwards. And people think Hendrix did that, but he didn't. He restrung. But so I make a lot of weird chords. I started learning like open tunings because Paul Westerberg, the Replacements, and the Stones would always do these like cool open tunings, and I can do that because I'm strumming down on those small strings, and I can tune them like into whatever key the song is in, and so yeah, it created like a cool handicap, and then from there I just will try to always try to learn something new, but yeah, in the early albums it was like I kind of not really stuck to what I knew, but it was what spoke to me, the like power pop, melodic, punk rock thing. And then as I got older, I think starting with that album, So Long Astoria, with that song In This Diary on it, I think that's the first album. It really helped because we worked with Lou Giordano, who did like the Paul Westerberg album. Eventually he did Goo Goo Dolls, Boy Named Go, Sugar, Copper Blue, which is Bob Mould's band. Like a lot of stuff that was kind of more singer-songwriter of like people who grew up in the punk rock world. But he was like, you should really learn these things. He really was like a father figure that taught me like more about my own songwriting. He taught me like songs have these like beats and movements and peaks and valleys. And it was a really great experience to know like, okay, like there are things I do that I should really emphasize and focus on that are my strong points, like telling a strong, vivid narrative and not just writing songs about, face value things like about a relationship. But if you do, try to find an like alternate way to say those things that's more clever and more ambiguous. And and so starting with that album and definitely in all these new songs, I feel like that was more. We were like a singer-songwriter, narrative-driven band in a punk rock or alternative world, which is cool for me because I love old country, I love Americana, I love folk. A song should be able to be stripped down to just a guy and an acoustic guitar. Like Dylan was always great because he could reinvent himself, and he did an album with what's that punk rock band? That song. There's a great version of him doing Joker Man, where it's just the Plugs. They were like a Latin American punk rock band of the LA community. And he basically, just like he did with the band, he like went and took them as his backing band in the 80s for a small period. And he was just always reinventing himself. And I think you got to be smart, you got to always search out for the next thing and always want to learn to be a better writer and guitar player and whatever. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. I'm glad you brought up Bob Dylan because it's one of my like ultimate favorite songwriters ever. I look at a picture of him literally while I'm talking to you. He's right here on my wall. He's the awesome man. I love that part of it. So yeah, I want to kind of dive back into some older parts here because it's always cool when I get like a brief, right? And they always email me and say, hey, do you want to hang out with Kristopher for a little while and talk about music? And I'm like, sure. And then I kind of read through it and they give me some highlights of like things you guys have done in your career and things like that. And I never really get to hear the backstory, but there's a cool piece here that I want to kind of dive into. And so Basically it just says, you guys started the band in 1996, then you were signed to Columbia, and then released the album So Long Astoria in 2003. And even though it's a really simple line of like the launch of everything for you guys, I always like to learn from the artist perspective, because there's always like these really cool things that happen in your career as a musician. One of those things being like the first time you hear one of your songs on the radio, maybe, or you finally have someone that really believes in you and wants to put pen to paper and do a contract and sign you to a label, or you get your first album release and people start telling you how they feel about you and the music that you're putting out into the world. Talk to me about this whole like 96 to 2003 section of your life when all of this stuff just started happening. The band goes together, you guys get signed, everything is kind of like moving forward. What was life like that in the very beginning stages of just getting launched?
Well, I think on paper, it probably seemed, it really kind of just started out as just me writing songs on a 4-track, playing everything. And the Ataris in the studio has always been me playing all the instruments except for the drums. I'll write the drums, I'll show it to the drummer, and then have the drummer play everything. Like, there was a live band that I would teach the songs to, but it was generally like my thing. So it's like that was kind of how the Ataris always was. So I think there's a lot of bands like that. Like it's like Dinosaur Jr. The Lou and Murph are a big part of that, but like Jay, he's kind of that band in a lot of ways. And like, if I think that's kind of how the band started, just me as a bedroom project, because I couldn't find a drummer in my town. So 96 was that. I would give my demos to every band I would go see because I was looking for a drummer. There was a want ad in the cassette that said drummer wanted, here's my phone number, or I think I had my address. So, at that time it was like snail mail. And a band from the West Coast reached out to me, said, hey, we're starting an indie label. The band was the punk rock band, the Vandals. I didn't really listen to the Vandals at the time. I knew of their band, of course, but it was like not of the world of punk rock that like I was as much of a fan of. And I was like, this is killer. I'll reach out to them. And I did. They're like, if we fly you to California, this is 96, it's like, would you be interested in making a record? And I'm like, of course. But you realize that demo is just me and a drum machine. They're like, well, what if we find you a drummer to play and learn your songs? I'm like, of course. So through them, I met our first drummer. I got there. It was sadly evident that he had some addiction problems, heroin. And it was like something that in Indiana, I'd never encountered that. We were just the small towns. And so back then it was non-existent. So it was like he played the songs and then, basically sent him home. And, we didn't really do any touring or anything until like the album came out. It did whatever, but he was part of another band that was kind of known, another punk band, this band called Lagwagon. So they tried to sell it. It was like, this was Derek's new project. And it was one of those things, they didn't really have a way to like get the songs out there. So it wasn't really until our second album that Blue Skies, Broken Hearts, Next 12 Exits, that Fat Mike from the band No Effects put this song San Dimas on a compilation for his label Fat Records, which was besides Epitaph, Brett from Bad Religion's label, it was the biggest punk label at the time. Maybe Lookout Records as well. It put out Green Day's early albums. So Fat put that song on a compilation that they would give out with their mail order. And that was basically the thing that launched the band. And I remember we were on tour playing for 5 people this is not a joke, this is how it was, 5 people at the basement of a bagel shop in Albuquerque at the start of the tour. By the end of the tour, there were like 100 or 200 people, and we noticed they were singing that song. And then some of our older songs. And I'm like, what's happening? And we just felt the momentum. And then we just kept getting in the van and touring. It was all word of mouth. And then by the time we had released our third album, End Is Forever, that was the last on the independent label, Kung Fu Records, that album had almost sold like it was maybe 300,000 to 500,000 copies on an independent label just by touring and word of mouth. So then we had all these major labels that were interested, but it was one of those things where I'm like, I don't want to do that until I feel like it's an organic thing and it's the right timing. So once we had completed our contract with Kung Fu, I felt the only thing that was natural was to bring the music to more people, and that was it. I took a really modest deal with Columbia. So with a friend of ours who was in the band Toad the Wet Sprocket, said, Glenn Phillips, a great singer-songwriter from Santa Barbara, said, they're a great label that are really artist-driven, same A&R guy. He's like, nothing but good things. You should go with Columbia. They're great. And I did that. And there were bigger deals, but for me, it was always about you will have complete control of your music. And I did. And then from then we chose Lou Giordano to record the record because he did these great records I mentioned that I love. And the rest is kind of history. Then So Long Astoria came out. The album went gold. In This Diary went like, I think it was the top 10 or top 15 of the Billboard charts. And then, of course, after that, Boys of Summer came out, and it's already an amazing song. There's a cool reason I'll tell later why I chose to cover that song, but that is like from 96 to 2003 kind of the trajectory. But there's a lot of other cool sub-stories, but, you know, rather than bore you with another tangential ramble, which I'm great at, that's kind of the concise history of the Ataris for those who don't know what we do.
No, I dig it. Thank you so much for that perspective too, because
Yeah,
you never
course.
really get to hear from the artist perspective on how things truly like developed in. We always get to see the little headlines, but we're like, you know, what's the story behind how it actually worked out? And so I appreciate you sharing that information. I think that helps a lot of other artists that are out there potentially even listening to our conversation today and kind of being curious about how you really get your launching point. But then obviously in that time frame, things were a lot different. I want you to tell me the story about the Boys of Summer and why you guys covered it now, if you don't mind, because I'm a big fan of that song too. Knowing that you guys covered it and had it on that album that also had In This Diary, which I was telling Kristopher before, like that was on my playlist back then, but I didn't know the band. I just knew the song, which is kind of interesting to be able to connect all these years later. So yeah, tell me why you covered the Boys of Summer. What's the theme there?
Well, first off, obviously, it's an amazing song. And for me, like that, I remember being a kid, and I was the kid who had like a little jam box, and I would tape songs off of the Rick D's Top 40 or the Casey Kasem Top 40. And I remember hearing that song, and just like it connected with me, the melancholy of it, just the melody, everything. And then, you know, of course, it's written by Mike Campbell, Tom Petty's guitar player, and Don Henley, two of the best songwriters. And so when my parents split up when I was 5 years old, my dad battled alcoholism. My mom left, and he later passed away due to complications from that. So his mother and father lived in Florida. We had this thing where we would go there every summer and visit them. So when my parents split up, it was one of the first summers I remember. I think maybe a few years later, when I was about 8 years old. One of the first times I went down there since they had split. My grandmother's like talking to my mom. My mom's like, he'd really love to come down and visit you guys. And, you know, everything that's going on, you know, would you have him down there? So my mom, pre 9/11, saw me to the gate of the plane, put me on the plane as an unaccompanied child. And then my grandmother met me at the gate, which is wild to think in hindsight that this is something people do. So I remember being down there, missing my mom and dad. It was very sad and kind of nostalgic because they lived in a little trailer in Largo, Florida. And it was a really kind of tropical, storm-ridden summer. I remember being stuck in the trailer. We didn't get to go and do the theme park stuff because it rained every day of the 2 weeks I was there. My grandmother picking up on that I was probably depressed. And she was like, look, I'll take you out to the local department store. They sold records. She's like, I'll let you pick out one record so you have something to listen to on their big, giant, wooden coffee table-sized turntable.
I love that. My grandmother had the same thing, dude. I remember that so well.
So heavy, so you know, it was a piece of furniture.
Yeah.
But it was a thing. And so I remember going to I think it was a Ben Franklin department store, kind of like Kmart down in the South. And I remember seeing on the end cap this Building the Perfect Beast album by Don Henley, and I was like, I love that Boys of Summer song, and that was on the radio at the time. So I bought that. I listened to that record the entire time I was there, and it reminded me of better times when my mom and dad were down there, and it was just, you know, kind of thing like that. So when fast forward in 2001, 2002, when my grandmother Selma passed away, I remember thinking like, I would love to record that song kind of as a tribute to her. It always reminded me of that summer being down there, missing my parents, and just all that kind of melancholy attached to it. And so I showed the band the song, and I was like, I'm going to record this song in the album. So I recorded it. And but funny thing, they didn't know how to play the song until K-Rock added it. It wasn't even supposed to be a single. Our second single, we were ready to film a video for the song My Reply, which is also a cool, touching story about a girl in Australia who wrote us a letter, and she'd been going through some depression and suicide and eating disorder and some things. And that song is a line for line reply to her letter. So it was a touching song for me. We've got to film a video for it, and then we were playing the big radio festival for the big alternative station K-Rock in LA, and our A&R guy came backstage and goes, "Congratulations, Boys of Summer just became your single." I would go, "Can they fucking do that?" That was my response. I was like, "What?" So I literally had to show the band that song backstage. I mean, the drummer knew it because he played on it, but the other guys didn't know it. I mean, I played the bass and the guitar, so I was like, "Here you go." And we had to hack our way through it on stage, and I think we played it fine, but that was how it went. And I remember, and it's kind of a funny dig at the fact that everything that happened. I jokingly made a shirt because I remember the Eagles made a shirt, I guess subconsciously, because at the time I didn't do this intentionally, but I remember they made a shirt that says, "Who the fuck is David Geffen?" So I jokingly wrote, "Who the fuck is Don Henley?" on the back of my Pedro the Lion shirt. And I wore it on stage just as a joke. And, I thought, they'd take fun of it, the situation.
Right.
Of course, this is the time Rolling Stone takes a picture of me. So Irving Azoff, their manager, who was our manager's old partner, saw it and called up our manager, goes, "They'll never play that fucking song ever again." And mind you, Irving, that's the character that the guy from Entourage, Ari, was made after. They used to call Irving. Irving's like the iconic manager of LA. They called him the Poison Dwarf because he's a short dude that would get angry, but he's a fucking genius. He managed the Eagles their entire career. So we had to call Don Henley on the phone and talk to him, which was cold calling Don Henley. Our bass player talked, but I guess he basically said, "Mike, you guys can play that song as long as you want. I think it's a great cover." And he was really nice about it.
That's cool.
I thought it was and anyway, so luckily he didn't seem to take, he got it, but it's a great song, and I'm honored people took to it, and we still play it at every show today, and I'm sure we'll play it the rest of my career.
That's awesome, man. No, thanks for sharing that story too. I want to learn a little bit more about the personal stories. Obviously, you guys got some new stuff that's coming out, or that is out right now. There's a new song called Car Song, but I want to dive into a little bit more of the inspiration. I love just kind of picking artists' brains about some of this stuff. So let's just go in your brain here, Kristopher. Like when you're sitting down, realizing that, okay, I'm gonna strum my guitar for a little bit. I'm gonna try to find some kind of unique new thing. How does the songwriting process or the inspiration process start with you? Are you kind of one of those people that likes to sit and strum on the guitar until something clicks? Or are you humming? Do you hear or see something happening in the world and just kind of write a line and then it just takes off from there? What's your inspiration when you start writing music?
Okay, there's a few ways, but like usually for me, like say one of the biggest ways for me is like I love to just like when we're playing shows, I will drive every show. Like I just drove to play. We played a show in Alaska. I looked at it as like, okay, I know it was our first time. It was great. But I was like, everyone else is flying to the show. I will always get my car, drive. I drove 6 days up, 6 days back, and I made it into a journey that was kind of based around writing and inspiration. And I went and saw glaciers. I stayed at little cabins. And like, for me, when I'm writing, I'm thinking out loud. I'm looking at things. And most of my writing, at least in the last 15, 20 years, is very stream of consciousness. Starts with, I'm driving and maybe I see like there's one line in the first song of the new album no one's heard yet called Truth or Consequences. That's the name of the song. And I was living in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, small town in the southern New Mexico during 2020. And I was driving out through White Sands and out to Alamogordo to go to a dentist because all the dentists were shut during the first year of COVID. Mm-hmm. And so I remember seeing an eagle perched up high on the top of this light pole, and there's something about the imagery I saw. It really struck me, and I just thought about how in this time, these dark things I was going through, I went through a really difficult breakup. I got COVID for 6 weeks, ended up in the hospital, nearly died. All these things, I felt like, I'm not I guess I could sort of a spiritual person, but I'm not, I grew up in a religious household to some extent. We didn't go to church, but there was always something. And so I just thought about through these dark times, I always felt like, maybe it was my father, maybe it was my great grandmother, but somebody was kind of looking out for me and like, hey, you're going to get through this. So I saw this eagle perched up high and I wrote this line about, the eagle talking to me, saying like, don't be afraid of this darkened world. There's beauty in the darkness. You just have to set it free. And that became a line at the first song. And so the first song is kind of me stuck in this town, this whole like reset of my life, having to rebuild from the ground up, not knowing where I'm going next. But there's just this, I like to write imagery and try, like I said earlier, try to find very different alternative ways of describing imagery. Like Tom Waits, he had this quote once, and I love him, and great, was like I got to see him play one time, but he would talk to, there's this quote on my refrigerator about how every song needs like a name, a face, something to drink, something to eat. Like there's layers, and that's his quote. I love to, just describe every little detail, and it needs to have a descriptive narrative. And so for me, it kind of starts that way. Sometimes I'll be like, just a couple of songs of this record, I literally went into the shower, came out of the shower, and I had a complete thought of melodies, a little bit of words, and the two songs were just burst like that in like the span of going into the shower, coming out of the shower, and be like, oh, that's a song in my head. I better listen to that. And I just hummed it, wrote it down. And then I went into the studio, because there's a guest house at the studio here where I record in Arizona. Went into the studio, Bob, my drummer on the record, and on all my records, new records, and the guy who runs the studio. I was like, here's a new idea I just came up with. Let's just jot it down. And that birthed 2 new songs on the record. So sometimes it's like that. And then, I find I write the worst under pressure and when I'm pushing myself. Granted, Stephen King, I do feel he was onto something in the On Writing book when he's talking about, you need to do this every day, because I found for my years of kind of writer's block, now that I make myself go into the studio every month. Like I book studio time, even if I know that I might not have something ready. I always have this backlog of a couple hundred fragments and ideas in my iTunes library. And I kind of funnel that down to like 20 or 50 that I want to focus on. And that's what I did for this record. But then I'll come up with new things on the spot, like I described. But yeah, that's kind of usually it. But I'm never one of those guys that just sits around and plays my instrument daily. I respect those guys, like just say like John Five or somebody that are like gnarly players. And I feel like I'm grateful for my abilities and I can play solos and do all that. But like, there's a certain level of like wankery that goes into like shredder dudes. Some of them are amazing, but you like we talked about Dylan. Dylan is an amazing musician, but you need to be able to strip the song down to just one guy and a guitar, because there's something to be said about like those old country songs, Hank Williams, or some of like those songs that began with folk songs, like Woody Guthrie, like whatever. They are a song that is narrative driven, and it will work if it's just one person and a guitar. So yeah, for me, that's how it kind of starts.
Yep, and I love that stuff. I love the stripped down version of a lot of things. That's one of my big things. Like I wanna every song that ever gets released to have like an acoustic version. I just want to hear the singer and a guitar player and just chilled, Like that's what I want to hear so bad. But they don't really do all that. So now you have this new song that just came out called The Car Song. Is this the one you were just talking about where you really got inspired on this drive? And
No.
Okay.
That song no one's heard yet. That's called Truth or Consequences, New Mexico.
Okay.
And it will kick off the record. But Car Song is the second song, and at least in my sequence right now, Car Song was born out of the first new car I ever bought. My first car was given to me by my parents when I was 15 as like a gift for, getting my first job or whatever, and they knew I needed a car. But my first new car I actually bought, I had some used vans, and I had a 68 Ford Fairlane I bought on eBay for $1,000 and remodeled it. But my first new car was, boringly enough, a 2003 Dodge Neon. So this song starts with that.
I love that.
And it was like more so about the memories and the adventures I had driving this car around North America in the life of the car. And so it starts out, you see the car resting amongst the rust with dandelions springing out of its lifeless body in the junkyard where it now lies, because the car met its demise because a woman slammed on her brakes in front of me, and I swerved out of the way and hit this giant construction flashing sign so I wouldn't crush her car, because I was like, okay, this person just slammed on their brakes on the freeway. And it literally peeled back the roof of the car. And,
wow,
I bet that crazy thing, it was like a Pulp Fiction moment. I walked out of the car, not a shred of glass on me. I'm like, what the hell? I was like, did God come down and stop the bullets? It was wild. It was like, that scene in Pulp Fiction where they get shot like 7 times and not a bullet hits. But so the car, that kind of birthed this idea of just writing a song about memory and all these memories, and try to do it in a way that it's supposed to sound like I'm talking about a person, a girl specifically, but it's just literally written about the car. And the only verse that kind of strays from that, the second verse of the winter sky is weeping, the factories lie in their graves like Cold War artifacts marching in some ghost parade. That line is about the factory, the General Motors factory my dad worked at for 37 years, making cars in Indiana, where I grew up. My dad had passed away in 2014, and I wanted to kind of write an homage to him in the song. So this is a nod to him and the factory, and how Anderson, Indiana, where I grew up, looks like every other small town, USA town now, where it's very Eastern European, Cold War, Beirut, boarded up factories and main streets boarded up. And it's just a very drab, gray thing I wanted to describe. Like every good Billy Joel or Springsteen song has that imagery of, we're living here in Allentown, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt it needed that because it was a tie-in to, like, my dad made these cars when he was young and throughout his life. And that was my nod to him. But that's kind of how that song was birthed. And then the title "Car Song" was just kind of, that was a small nod to Bad Religion had a song called "God Song," and it was actually 2 words connected, just GODSONG is like one word. And I was going to title like that, but I'm like, people get confused enough by our names and stuff. I'm like, we'll just make it "Car Song." But so that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. Well, I want to encourage people to check you guys out for sure. It's the Ataris band.com was the website.
Yes.
But if you want to see them live, it's going to be hard in the US because you guys are going on a UK tour. It looks like you're going to have a bunch of dates overseas, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, Netherlands. Like, good Lord, buddy. You guys are definitely moving around, which is awesome. But Douglas Park in Chicago, September 19th, 20th, 21, Riot Fest. You guys are playing Riot Fest with some excellent bands are going to be on this thing. Like, it's also the 20th year anniversary for Riot Fest. I've been there before. When it kind of just started. Well, you guys play there, but I've been there. But I've been there like when it was first kind of kicked off, which was very cool. So 20-year anniversary is really cool, but having you guys there is going to be excellent. So if people want to see you live, definitely look into that festival and go check that out. Yeah,
then we're doing Aftershock Festival in Sacramento if anyone's on the West Coast, and that's with a bunch of really exciting big bands too. A lot of metal stuff, a lot of punk, a lot of indie. I love those festivals that are just a broad variety of bands. And that to me is always really exciting. So
for
cool,
sure.
Cool to.
Well, Kristopher,
cool
thank you so much, man.
You.
I appreciate the walk down memory lane. Obviously, your music was on my playlist when I was a kid. I loved a lot of the little tidbits. I'm gonna just kind of bring a little census together. I also had a 2003 Dodge Neon when I was a kid.
Wow.
That was my first car. You mentioned something about
awesome.
1979, which is the year I was born. So there was all these little tidbits in our conversation that were just kind of like boom, boom, memories all the time. So I really appreciate the conversation and being able to, chill and talk about music with you. And, I hope
pleasure.
I hope you get another 40 years in this, man. Like, you're definitely killing it. I really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you. Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun. Nice talking music with a fellow music lover, and hope you have an awesome day, and hope to do it again sometime.
Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the show. Please take a minute to head over to www.savfair.com and subscribe to our publication.